What is up, guys? It's Mel, and welcome back to my channel. I thought I would do something different because I'm bringing back It's That Kind of Gaming, which is my gaming news show where I discuss all the hottest topics of the week. I've been on hiatus from that show since June, so it's been a long time. Anyway, I'm getting annoyed about this because I feel really bad for Nintendo, and we're going to talk about it. And it's about Bloomberg. Now, Bloomberg earlier this year basically spoke about how Nintendo are working with companies to make a 7-inch OLED screen, and it was going to be the Nintendo Switch Pro. This and that was happening, and there was going to be 4K capabilities, and it turns out that that just wasn't true. And then we get the OLED version of the Switch, which is basically the same as the original Switch, but with an OLED screen and a little bit of better battery. A lot of YouTubers have been getting their Nintendo Switch OLEDs early so that they can unbox them and discuss them and talk about them, everything like that. And the thing is that Nintendo ended up getting blasted for something that wasn't their fault. They never says once on their social media or from the company themselves that they were working on a 4K model of the Switch. There was a revised model in the works. That is what was proposed, and then we got the OLED version. But again, Nintendo ended up being attacked, and I know Nintendo isn't the patron saint of, this and that, but at the end of the day, they never promised a 4K model. That was Bloomberg. So Bloomberg had come out yesterday or the day before and says that developers had received 4K development kits for the Nintendo Switch, and that they were going to be making basically 4K video games for the Nintendo Switch, which got the hype train running up and running again about a Switch Pro. Then YouTubers hit the scene, were like, oh my god, there's a Switch 4K coming out, the Switch Pro's happening again, all this and that, and people were spreading news and rumors like wildfire. I get that they're rumors, but at the same time, this is what Nintendo got blasted about again. Luckily, Nintendo came out and basically debunked what Bloomberg was saying. And I tried to look through, I don't have a subscription to Bloomberg. You've got to have a subscription to look at their website. And so I went on their Twitter and couldn't find anything about the Nintendo story. So not unless they've taken it down. Now, according to Bloomberg, 11 developers were working on 4K games. They announced one of them, which was Zynga Games. And they ended up coming out and said that that wasn't true. Zynga Games are working on Star Wars Hunters for the Switch, and they were basically outed and had to come out and say, look, we're not working on it. And Nintendo themselves have also issued a statement and said that everything that Bloomberg says just wasn't true. Now, with the OLED model just coming out, it's highly unlikely that we would ever get a Switch Pro. I was watching RGT85 and he was discussing it as well, and it would be a bit on the stupid side to release a Switch Pro. We're 4 years into the Switch's life cycle. They've just released an OLED model, and I think that if it's Nintendo, we'll have to wait until we get a successor to the Switch. They're not going to release the Switch Pro when they've just released the Switch OLED. Do you know what I'm saying? It's a bit redundant. If they were to release a Switch Pro, then it wouldn't be until maybe 3 or 4 years down the line, because the Switch is selling like hotcakes. It's still selling out, and there's a lot of people that aren't a part of the console war, or they don't really understand what is going on in the gaming scene when it comes to consoles. They don't read about a 4K Switch Pro. They don't understand what the PS5 really means, or the Xbox Series S or X. They just want a new console to play on, and this is generally geared towards the younger generation who just want a video game to play. They don't care about maybe 4K, they don't care about this and that. Whereas if you were born in the 90s or maybe the 80s and the 90s, growing up with all of the different consoles, and you were part of that system where you were like, oh my god, the Nintendo 64, oh my god, it's got to have this and that, oh my god, look at the PlayStation, look at the PlayStation 2, look at the Xbox. You know, people have to remember that it took Nintendo years just to implement HD into their consoles, with the Wii U being the first HD console. I don't think the Wii had HD capabilities. I think it was the Wii U that was the first HD console. You know, and it's taken them 4 years into the life cycle of the Switch to just give us Nintendo 64 and Sega Mega Drive games. So I think the chances of a Switch Pro are really slim. You know, but there has been an update, and this is on IGN. Nintendo has denied the report, and it's funny because, you know, Nintendo is going to face backlash because of Bloomberg, and they need to keep their mouth shut. And it's really interesting because I want to know why they outed Zynga Games, who are making the Star Wars Hunter games, and says, oh, they were the one of the companies that are getting the 4K development kits for the Switch, and yet they never said the names of any of the other companies. Like, why out them and not the other 10? You know, it doesn't make any sense. Okay, so Nintendo released an additional statement reiterating that Bloomberg's report that developers have access to a 4K development kit for the Nintendo Switch is not true. Nintendo also continues to insist that it has no plans for an additional model outside of the Switch OLED. You can find the original story below. Now, I do think that this is the original model of the Switch. It's not the improved battery version of the Switch. This is the original Switch. And my boyfriend got me this back in 2018. And the only thing I don't like about it now is that the Joy-Cons are broken, and the price of Joy-Cons are ridiculous. You know, but I am going to save up for a Switch OLED. The reason why I think the Switch OLED came out is for quality of life improvements, and because they are basically phasing out this model of the Switch, as well as the improved battery version of the Switch. So we are just going to be basically working with the Nintendo Switch OLED, which is fine by me. I usually play my Switch in handheld modes. I love OLED. When I had a PlayStation Vita, that was OLED. You know, so I'm going to be predominantly playing handheld modes when I get the Switch OLED. It's going to take a little while to get it, but, you know, I think the price of Joy-Cons are ridiculous, but I've had this Switch since 2018, so I don't have the improved battery version. But yeah, so this is the original Switch. I think they're phasing out these models so that we're stuck with the Switch OLED. But the Switch Pro, I don't see happening. We might get a 4K model, but that will be a successor to the Switch. It took years just to implement the HD feature, you know, and it's taken them years just to change their online presence, you know, with the Switch, you know, so I doubt that we'll get a 4K Switch anytime soon. And with them just releasing an OLED, with the microchip shortage and everything, I doubt that they're going to make a Switch OLED model, a Switch Pro version. Yeah, we're not going to see a Switch Pro anytime soon. Maybe I predict it. If I was to predict it, I'd say maybe 2024, 2025. With the Switch selling so many units, it's hard to say when we'll get a Switch Pro. But with Bloomberg outing companies that are working for Nintendo, and you know, they've only outed like Zynga Games and not outed the other companies that have supposedly a 4K development kit for the Switch. Is pretty pathetic, you know, and it's bad. It's bad reporting. You know, it's bad news reporting, because if they're continuously going to do this. Now, when E3 came about, I told my friend that if there was a Switch Pro, we might not get it until next year. That was my ballpark figure at the time, because Breath of the Wild 2, you know, I thought that maybe they would release the Switch Pro alongside Breath of the Wild 2 because it's going to be a big hit. But Then we get the Switch OLED, and it's made me change my mind. So, um, so this was it. I don't know if the tweet is still up. What is? Okay, so a news report on September 30th, 2021 falsely claims that Nintendo is supplying tools to drive game development for a Nintendo Switch with 4K support. To ensure correct understanding among our investors and customers, we want to clarify that this report is not true. And that was just one of two. We also want to restate that, as we announced in July, we have no plans for any new model other than Nintendo Switch OLED, which will launch on October 8th, 2021. When the Switch OLED was first announced over the summer, fans and observers alike noted its lack of overall improvements to the base model. While the Switch OLED featured a much nicer screen, it lacked the 4K display and improved processor, long rumoured to be part of the so-called Switch Pro. Nevertheless, it seems that multiple developers around the world have access to development kits that enable 4K graphics on the Switch. Bloomberg reports that Nintendo sent this kit to developers with the request to create games that support higher resolution games. It's unclear if Nintendo's original intentions changed owing to the ongoing chip shortages fueled by the global COVID-19 pandemic. Now, like I said before, if there is in fact a Switch Pro coming out, then it's possible that that won't be around for another few years, maybe 24, 25. But I doubt it would be announced for next year, especially since how the Switch OLED has just been announced, and Nintendo is, because even though OLED screens might be affordable to make at the present time, it's still going to be expensive overall to make the Switch and the dock and the Joy-Cons and the games. So they're not going to just, launch that and then suddenly work on something new, because even then there was a big gap between the 3DS and the 3DS XL and the new 3DS XL. So it's bad reporting on Bloomberg's side, because they did this before and Nintendo ended up getting massive backlash. And again, even though I know Nintendo isn't perfect, at the same time, do not go to YouTubers' channels and believe what they're saying when they say, oh, a 4K Switch is on the horizon, this and that's coming out, because it's pure bullshit. And it's, they don't get the full story, at least wait a day or two in advance for, more content to come out. And again, I've said countless times, unless it comes from the mouths of Nintendo themselves and comes from their social medias, that a Switch Pro or this certain game or, this certain piece of hardware is coming out, then it's not happening. It has to come from Nintendo themselves. Even if Nintendo is working with Bloomberg or working with certain media outlets or working with certain companies like Capcom or, Platinum Games or, anything like that, it still has to come from the heads of Nintendo themselves that they are working on this console or this certain piece of hardware or this certain game. Because at the end of the day, it's a Nintendo item, it's them that's making the unit. So, from concept to designing and to, putting it out there, announcing, putting the Switch out there and everything else. So don't listen to YouTubers that are saying, oh my god, the Switch 4K is coming out. It's great news, it's massive news. And then it comes out that it's just not true, because then Nintendo is going to face a massive backlash like they did when Bloomberg announced that they were working on a 4K Switch in the first place. And then it came out that it was just the OLED model. It doesn't work in the bigger scheme of things. So, in a statement to Bloomberg, Nintendo called its reports inaccurate but declined to elaborate further. Developers reportedly expect their 4K games to be released in the second half of 2022. Now, if Nintendo does announce a Switch Pro in 2022, hallelujah. But at the same time, people are going to bitch about it anyway from the price. I mean, look at the state people are in over Switch Online for Nintendo 64 and Sega Mega Drive games, even though it's going to be included with NES and SNES games. and everything else in between, people are just losing their fucking minds. People are going to bitch regardless. If they do announce a Switch Pro for the half part of 2022, again, that's great, but I do not see it happening. Because their sole focus is going to be on the OLED model, because it's just going to be released next week, to the masses. They're going to put all of their focus onto that to see how many units sell. Especially if, again, they're going to be phasing out this model of the Switch. The Switch Pro has been rumoured since at least 2019 when it was first mentioned in tandem with the console that would become the Switch Lite. Rumours, and again, Bloomberg and other media forums were saying that a Switch Pro was in the works, and then it was a Switch Lite, then they said it was a Switch Pro, then it was a Switch OLED. So Bloomberg really needs to check their resources and check their contacts, either within Nintendo or within the companies working for Nintendo, such as the developers for their games, to find out what exactly is happening, because even the inside man is wrong like 97% of the time. Rumours that it would include 4K graphics and an improved processor from Nvidia picked up steam earlier this year, but were ultimately dashed when Nintendo revealed the Switch OLED. Despite that, rumours persist that Nintendo is preparing an improved version of the Switch that can support more modern graphics. For now, Nintendo is focusing on the Switch OLED, which is set to release early next month, but this is now next week. In our hands-on review of the console, we praised the new screen, but noted the lack of material upgrades. Elsewhere, it will cost $350, a $50 increase from the base model. Even if they did announce a Switch Pro model, developers are going to have their hands full trying to fix the games that were released on the Switch and Switch OLED that don't have the power to run on the current Switch, such as Apex Legends, the depth of field view. Darksiders 3 got slammed because it's laggy, buggy, all of that stuff, and a bunch of other games that were released on the Switch that are high-end games that were released on the Switch that are buggy and laggy and all of that stuff. Developers that were working on those games are going to have to focus on fixing those games to give them a graphical overhaul and to fix those bugs and to basically give them a new fresh lick of paint, like Apex Legends, because it runs badly on the Switch. Like I can't play it handheld. I cannot play this Apex Legends handheld on the Switch because it messes with my eyeballs, but I think that, if there is a Switch Pro with 4K capabilities, then companies are going to have to go back to these games and, give them a graphical overhaul and fix all of those bugs before working on, other games or passing them on to other sections of the companies to finish the game, in which case they might not know what to do, and then the game that they were originally going to release ends up being a buggy mess. So it's this constant cycle, so again, if there is a 4K model in the pipeline, it's not going to happen for another few years. I doubt that they would release it in 2022. With Breath of the Wild 2 coming out, I think that's just going to be for the Switch OLED. I don't even see it coming out on the base Switch, like the improved battery. Maybe it'll come out for the Switch Lite, but I don't think the Switch Lite will have the push it needs to support something like Breath of the Wild 2, because it's supposedly bigger, like 5 times bigger than the original. And games like Bayonetta 3, and all of those other games that are supposedly coming out. I mean, it's going to be one of those things. It's definitely going to be one of those things that Nintendo is going to have to really bite down on. Especially if media outlets are sprouting fake news like this. They've denied reports that they're working on a Switch Pro. They've said countless times, and it's led to backlash on Nintendo's part. Nintendo was slammed because they didn't release a Switch Pro version, and people are like that in the comments. Oh, give us a Switch Pro or I'm moving to another console. I'm like, just go. Just who gives a flying fuck? Just go. Nobody cares. Unless it comes from the mouth of Nintendo, then it's not true. If it doesn't come from their social media, then it's not true. If it comes from Bloomberg, it's, they have to check their sources and their inside man. It's that simple. But let me know what you guys think about this, because it is an interesting story to discuss. I want to hear your guys' thoughts on it. And a massive thank you to everybody who's subscribed to the channel. It's a constant shock. I am going to be coming back to release new clips and videos. I've just been dealing with some family things. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.